The uncrowned champ Charles Oliveira has been on a roll, and he's finally getting the respect that he deserves, but there's still some doubt about how well he'd do against someone who's just as good of a grappler as him. Justin Gaethje, who's the last guy that fought Do Bronx, was asked about the vacant lightweight title fight, and he was very confident that Islam Makhachev won't dominate Oliveira like he does everyone else. First up, Gaethje's thoughts on Oliveira as an opponent. During the media day for UFC 278, Gaethje did a press conference for the first time since losing the title fight to Charles. Justin has not competed since, mainly because he decided to take some time off to get nose surgery. Now, most fighters don't get their nose fixed until their career is said and done, as it'll probably break again, but he thought it was the right move for him at this time. Naturally, one of the first things he was asked about was his thoughts on his last fight, what he thought of his own performance, and the way Charles neutralized the threat. Justin thought that his opponent was brilliant that night. He recalled being hurt badly within the first 10 seconds of the fight. Going into that bout, Gaethje was very dismissive about the striking ability of Do Bronx and thought the only threat he'd face will be on the ground. While the ground game from Oliveira was very real, it wasn't the only thing that led to the fight ending in the first round. Gaethje recalled getting hit with the shots. He gave an example of how most punches feel like a shock, but when Charles hit him, it felt like he'd put his tongue on a car battery. He felt something he'd never felt before in the cage, which says a lot. This is a guy who's been in wars with hard hitters like Eddie Alvarez, Dustin Poirier, and Michael Chandler, just to name a few. Next up, thoughts on Makhachev and Oliveira. Gaethje was asked about a number of matchups that have been made at the top of the division and what he thought would happen. Now, Justin's not a man who makes predictions, but he did say that there's no way that Islam Makhachev dominates Oliveira in their fight. He was asked about the reason for him saying that, and he said it was just a feeling, which he got because he shared the cage with Charles. There's an argument to be made in favor of Makhachev, and that's that he never faced Justin, but Justin was the last guy who fought Khabib before he retired. The guy knows what it's like to face both styles. Makhachev is the prodigy of Khabib, and their styles are quite similar. Justin added by saying that it might be about who gets the forward pressure. He thought Charles would move forward, and Islam will try, and if he succeeds, he'll win. He also said that he doesn't see Charles getting tired in that fight, and even if Islam takes him down in the first 2 rounds, Do Bronx won't get submitted and will eventually take over. Up next, how he feels after the nose surgery. As we mentioned earlier, Justin wanted to take some time off to get his nose fixed. When he was asked about how he feels now, Justin replied that he couldn't be happier with the result. Gaethje mentioned how he now gets to anticipate food before he gets it. He also talked about the small stuff, like being able to pronounce some words correctly. Before his nose got fixed, it was pretty noticeable in the way he talked that he had trouble breathing. The 33-year-old was then asked about the timing of the surgery, and he said he was just hoping someone would break his nose in a fight, so he had an excuse to get it fixed, all paid by the UFC. He thought Tony Ferguson would be the guy to do that, but he wasn't. That's the most insane thing to hope for, but that's why we call him the human highlight reel. Justin's hoping that he returns soon. He told the media that he hasn't been sparring, but he's had a few workouts. He'll be cleared to spar soon, and he's excited to finally wrestle and box while being able to breathe through his nose. Now for the big question, who will he fight next? One obvious candidate that everyone had for a fight with Gaethje was Rafael Fiziev. Both of them are deadly strikers who like to stand and bang. They both have a fan-friendly style, and they like to finish the fights. What's even better is that both of them are coming off of nose surgeries, so the timing couldn't have been better. Justin was asked about what he thought of the matchup, and he said Fiziev is an exciting fighter. It's not just about how good you are, it's also about the way you fight, and Rafael checks all the boxes. The 33-year-old talked about his prime and how he's not in his 20s anymore. Now he has to rest in between fights and take care of his body. He was aware that while he rests, the division would move on, but that's the beauty of this sport. Unlike football or other major sports, the athletes get to decide when they need time off, and while those sports aren't as violent as fighting, they're much more dangerous. And lastly, the GOAT conversation. Just to remind you, this press conference was before the shocking KO of Kamaru Usman at UFC 278. Before that fight happened, a lot of people were wondering where Usman belonged in the GOAT conversation. Justin, being his teammate, was asked this question, and he had an interesting response. Gaethje thought it'd be appropriate for each era to have its own GOAT, and if we talk about the current era, Usman is the GOAT without a doubt. And it wasn't just because of his win streak and title defenses, it's because of the way he's been finishing everybody. Gaethje has said in other interviews how guys like Royce Gracie, Matt Hughes, and GSP are some guys that he considers the greatest in their own eras. Now in other related news, first up, Dustin Poirier is fighting at MSG. It's been more than a month, and the UFC still hasn't announced the fight between Poirier and Chandler. Many people were excited to see that fight in November. A fan tweeted about their frustrations with the UFC for not booking the fight, and they got a reply from the Diamond himself. Poirier said in his response that he's fighting in November. He put out another tweet that said MSG, so he's referring to UFC 281, which is taking place at Madison Square Garden, headlined by the grudge match between Stylebender and Alex Pereira. But there might be some bad news in that tweet too. Dustin said that he was fighting, and it sounded like he was very confident, but he never mention Chandler's name. It could be because the UFC doesn't want to make that fight happen, and now he's willing to take on anyone on that date. Whatever the case may be, we need to see DP back in action. The guy's been waiting to get an opponent for almost a year. It's about time he gets a break. Let's just hope the deal gets done and we see him in there with Chandler. Imagine that scrap at MSG. Maybe ever for 5 rounds. Doesn't get better than that. Next up, Masvidal takes shots at DC. Ever since Leon became the welterweight champion, Jorge has been after him. The two had an altercation in Liverpool and Leon chased that fight for years, but it got ignored. Now the tables have finally turned and it's Masvidal who's going after the new champ. DC said on his show that Leon should do the same thing to him because of how he was screwed, and Gamebred didn't like what he heard from the former double champ. He went on Twitter and called Cormier a has-been who's just trying to get attention. Masvidal thought DC's just saying this because he's refused to go on his show. Jorge was confident that the fight will be booked, and then Cormier would have to promote it because his boss told him to. DC handled it with class by saying that Masvidal has always been the man and that it's his manager that's been tweeting everything from his account. And finally, another grappler for Wonderboy. It was recently reported that the UFC was trying to book a fight between Wonderboy Thompson and the undefeated contender from Ukraine, Shavkat Rakhmonov. Shavkat is a grappling heavy guy, and he's relatively unknown to the masses, so there's no winning for Thompson. Many fans wanted to see Wonderboy face a striker since his last 2 losses have been because of wrestling. Now, you might say that it means he should give up his spot on the rankings, as he isn't willing to fight every contender, but the NMF deserves a break. He needs a few fun matchups, maybe even a rematch with Masvidal. Who doesn't want to see that fight? Thompson has since turned down the fight, and no one blames him for it. And that's a wrap for this video. How do you think the fight between Makhachev and Oliveira plays out? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching our video, and we will see you in the next one.